listening to the Podcast Advertising Playbook, your resource to better understand and execute successful podcast ad campaigns. Hello and welcome to the Podcast Advertising Playbook. I'm your host, Heather Osgood. I'm joined today by Hetal Patel. She is the president of Ad Intelligence at iHeartMedia. Hetal, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Heather. Very, very nice to be here. Really excited and looking forward to this conversation.
So you're a data scientist, which means that you approach advertising from a totally different perspective than the creative types out there. Tell us a little bit about what ad intelligence means and what exactly you do at iHeart.
Yeah. It's interesting you say that because, I want to say about 2 years ago, I raised my hands at iHeart and I said, hey, I've done the data gig for about 2 decades now. And so I started in a very traditional consumer insights kind of role. From there, moved on to advanced analytics, the promise of big data. You say it and been there, done that kind of situation. And I'm like, at the end of the day, we're an ad sales run business. What we do for our partners is create consumer relationships and then rent those out to our partners in the form of advertising. So the challenge that I put forth in front of me is how do I bring 2 decades of insights and analytics experience to our ad assets? What do I understand about our advertising assets that we have, right? And at iHeart, for those of you who are not aware, we go anything from broadcast radio to streaming audio, to podcasting, to events. So the type of ad formats available to us, which is a conversation that a host will have in a morning show or an evening show, down to 30 seconds, 50 seconds, 60 seconds ad spots, to a long endorsement that can happen in the podcasting format or actual live activations that we do at events. So there's a whole plethora of options when it comes to ad formats, right? That's the richness of the different audio media types I have the luxury and the privilege of working on. How do I connect these together? How do I tie these back to some sort of a matrix for a client KPI, right? Like if you're a brand and you're saying, hey, I want to move through the journey of upper funnel to mid funnel to bottom funnel. Which of your media assets line up to what parts of my KPI? And teach me how do I do audio right? And the more I heard that, the more I felt compelled to say, there's a little bit of a science behind this. There is a method to this madness. And can I give that a shot? And so that's what this discipline that I'm building at iHeart is meant to be, applying that rigor of data and analytics to our ad assets.
So we know that in podcasting in particular, and audio in general, we represent a huge chunk of the available audience out there, right? So most people are listening to audio of some kind, and yet there is a big disparity between how much time people spend with audio and how many ad dollars we get. Is that ad intelligence working toward how do we kind of close that gap and how do we make brands really see the value that we're bringing in audio?
That's exactly right, Heather. So what we call that at iHeart is the audio gap, where I say about 30% of consumers' daily time is spent with audio. So a third of all your media time goes to just ears. Mm-hmm. And roughly about 9% of brand dollars or media budgets are being allocated to audio. So we call it 31.9. We almost have t-shirts that say 31.9, and we know what that means because that's a large part of creating education and awareness, right, in the industry. Because I think there are certain mediums that are overutilized and saturated. So how do you help brands and partners understand what is that right mix of media assets, particularly audio, given the amount of momentum it has seen with regards to podcasting in the last few years?
Mm-hmm. I always think so. I always go back to kind of the beginning of my career. I started in radio ad sales and did that for several years. And then I moved to newspaper ad sales, which is kind of backwards. I think a lot of times people start with the older medium and move to something that's a little newer. But when I was in radio, it was so hard to get advertisers to see the value because it wasn't tangible. And the minute that I moved to newspaper, it was like somebody opened like the ad sales skies and like just dumped money on me. And part of it was because I could walk into a business and say, here's your ad. Doesn't it look great? And people would walk in the door of that store or that auto dealer with the ad in their hand and they would say, it's working. working. And in audio, there just isn't that same tangibility. Now, obviously, fast forward 20 years, and it seems like digital gets an unfair percentage of the spend because there's that trackability and there's all of this rich data. And it feels like part of the reason that audio doesn't get more of that 30% that we should be getting is because the advertiser doesn't see that, oh, somebody listened and then they clicked through and they made a buying decision. But what's your take on why there is such a big disparity?
So many points to add there. As you're saying, I had to really hold myself back to not interrupt you. A couple of things. One, I think what we call it is a little bit of a bias of the coasts. So when you think about America and when you think about like agencies or brands in terms of where they sit, typically you'll see a lot of media and advertising and marketing is concentrated on the coasts, right?
Hmm.
So this is a very different conversation when I have these conversations with brands who are more spread apart, who are more regional and local in nature, because they recognize the value of this medium because exactly to your point, they are that consumer who actually experiences it. So I don't have a hard time communicating the value proposition of it. But when you think about the micro centers that are like in urban, super urban dens like Manhattan for that matter, those folks are on the subway, and because they don't drive the car, they assume that 95% of America also doesn't drive the car or doesn't drive to work every morning or doesn't spend 60 minutes in traffic. In fact, our traffic levels are back to pre-COVID levels right now, right?
Mm.
So it is a little bit of a bias that I don't know if you've heard of the studies that we've been doing. We call it the New American Consumer in conjunction with Malcolm Gladwell, and where we've started to pull out some of these biases that we started to feel at iHeart. I feel like there is people don't recognize what the real new American consumers in America are consuming, watching, so on and so forth, versus what they think they're doing.
Uh-huh.
So marketers live in a different spot, make a different amount of money. Their composition is slightly different. They chase
Mm.
very edgy, trendy things without recognizing that mass market audiences are nothing like them. They don't live in those urban centers. They consume media slightly more differently than they do. And so, to your point, I don't think the issue is so much that I can't walk in with an asset. The issue is that the subset of people that I'm talking to, concentrated on coast, sometimes feel like the rest of the America behaves like them.
Hmm.
And, without getting too political, the election is the proof of why what we thought was going to happen versus what actually happened, right? Like, so it's like there's this disconnect between marketers and consumers in America today. And I feel like we've created this vacuum almost around us to say, oh, I love pickleball. So that's the favorite sport of America. That's America's favorite pastime. You want to know the top two participatory sports in America is cornhole and bowling. And pickleball is nowhere to be found in the top two sports. But that's because we as marketing and advertising community love it. And so we think everybody is playing it, but not everybody is playing it. Same with regards to Aperol Spritz. The same study showed us that almost 60% of Americans don't know, have never heard of Aperol Spritz. I promise you, I've never been to a marketing mixer that doesn't serve Aperol Spritz. So, like there's so much proof, there's so much data going back to, there is this disconnect, and we have forgotten a little bit that who we are is not exactly the consumer you're trying to reach day in and day out. If you are a mass market brand, you're trying to reach that person who actually does spend that time in the car, who does consume different media than you do. And are we as marketers taking that responsibility seriously and like kind of scratching through the surface a little bit to understand what are those passion points of people I'm trying to reach? Or am I showing up in those places? Am I showing up with the right language in those places? So on and so forth.
Hmm. Oh, I love that. I feel like that was so well put. I struggle sometimes with advertisers because they all want everyone to make over $200,000 a year. And I'm like, have we looked at the median income in the US? Like,
Too.
it's so funny to me. And I feel like you're saying, where that disconnect is. And it is so difficult because if you live in this environment or you're at this certain income level, or these are the things you surround yourself with, and we know that it is true, but with social media, all of that is reinforced, right? Because we just continue to surround ourselves with more and more and more of the same.
No, and like
It's
exactly.
just like we live in these vacuums and we think that everyone is like us, and that isn't true. And yeah, that's so, so fascinating.
And
So
it's interesting you say that because, Heather, during COVID, one of the most appalling, I'll give you a couple other interesting ones if you find this interesting. One was I found out during COVID, 65% of consumers were putting something back at a checkout because they couldn't afford it.
65.
65% were putting something back at checkout. And you're talking about like the Walmarts and Targets. You're not talking about $1,000 laptop being put back. You're talking about groceries. You're talking about things that you're going on a weekly basis to purchase. That was being put back. And I think that shocked so many marketers when I would tell them that. But that, to your point, is the reality on the street, right? And we are so far removed from that. A couple of
Right.
others that I've noticed. One was, at what point do you consult somebody when you make a decision? And I asked that question off of consumers as well as off of marketers. So for marketers, if it's $1,000 purchase, that's when I ask somebody and be like, oh, I gotta ask someone before I just hit credit card buy. For consumers, you want to guess what that dollar amount was?
100?
Yes. For
Yeah.
$100, they
Right.
will ask someone before they make a purchase. And the steps in the purchase, there was a step that shocked me, surprised me, which is save up. So not only will they look up the product online, they will research, they will ask people, then they start saving up. Again, this is yet another fact when I
Wow.
speak to my marketers about it, they're like, people save up for $100. Like
Right.
it's something that we can't wrap our head around because fortunately we are at that place in our lives where we don't have to do that. But going back to your median income, going back to understanding the reality in the street and who is the core consumer or the mass market consumer, you have to understand these pain points that they are facing on a day-to-day basis, which is very different than you and I.
Yeah. Yeah. So fascinating. So I feel like one of the topics, at least in podcasting, that we discuss all the time is metrics. That the reason that advertisers don't invest more is because the metrics aren't there, the data is not there. Do you see that as being an obstacle to advertisers purchasing ads?
So, Heather, I think not so much anymore, right? I would say two
Okay.
years ago or 3 years ago, I definitely heard that. And I didn't react to this even when you said earlier, whether that be radio, whether that be digital audio, or whether that be podcasting. If anyone says something cannot be measured, I would challenge them and be like, show me why, how? Because
Hmm.
anything that is measurable digitally is also measured in podcasting and in radio as well today. At least I can speak on behalf of iHeart and the amount of time, effort, energy, resources we've invested in making sure this medium is completely trackable and measurement. Like, for example, I'll just give you a simple
Yeah.
example. For every e-commerce client, we have a web-based broadcast radio solution, which shows you ran a spot, here's what happened to your website in real time. So you started your campaign, you can start tracking and you can start seeing what the occurrence of the ads were and in which geo and which area and what traffic is coming from where. If that's not measurable, I don't know what else is, right? And I'm talking about radio. So if I can do that for radio, tell me if I can or cannot do that for podcasting. I obviously can do that for podcasting. So my point is, I think there was a misnomer. There was a little bit of this like, oh, digital audio can't be measured or radio cannot be measured. Audio is not as measurable as digital. I noticed that trend about 2 or 3 years ago. We've worked really hard on creating some education and awareness around it.
Hmm.
And I would now challenge anyone who would say that's not doable. There are tons and tons of vendors, third-party vendors, currencies out there doing that. There is no truth to that statement anymore. Every metric is measurable down to MMM models, right?
Hmm.
In the light of everything that's going to happen with the loss of cookie and well, whether it may or may not happen because the Google decision keeps bumping.
Yeah.
Because marketers don't want to live in that uncertainty and said, okay, I'm just going to take control of my own destiny. I'm going to build my own MMM models that allow me to understand what channel is doing what for me.
Hmm.
Even down to that, we've seen some phenomenal success coming out of MMM models for us if the data they pipe in is correct and actual. Anytime someone says, oh, audio is not as measurable or favorable to me, my first question to them is, what data did you pipe in?
Hmm.
Because typically what happens in audio is people end up piping planned data instead of actual data. And when you
Mm.
when you pipe in planned data, you say 100 grips a week, 50 grips a week, and there is zero variability for 12 weeks. So now you have 12 data points just saying 100, 100, 100. And so as a result of that, the model's not picking up when your grips went up, did the actions go up too? Did the grips go down? Did the actions go down too? And so if you're using actual data where there's variance in that data, it shows up really well in your models. So, sometimes a lot of these misunderstanding around audio and radio measurement is around being able to have that conversation from a place of facts. When you say
Hmm.
it didn't work, what does that mean when you say it didn't work? Can you tell me? Oh, I didn't have the data. Oh, it was not done correctly. Oh, it was not piped in. Oh, we don't have this spend. So a lot of times, like you've spent a really small amount versus your other media make up 90% of the media and say, oh, this media didn't perform well. I'm like, have you heard of an S curve? Like obviously do not perform well because you have to have a certain amount of spend for it to have a certain amount of impact. What was that spend? So what I've noticed very quickly, Heather, is as soon as I get past that first point, whether they say it's not measurable or it's not doing well, or I don't know how to measure it, or so on and so forth, minute you get past that first 30 seconds and you start peeling the onion a little bit, you start to make a lot of real progress and be like, oh, your problem is you don't have the right data. Oh, your problem is your weight levels are not correct. Oh, your problem is you ran it locally, but you're looking for the impact happening nationally. Oh, your KPI is a website metric, but your creative is just creating awareness of the brand and there is no call to action to go on the website. So you just have to be really sure of what you're bringing to the table, understand it, and feel confident to say, my intention is to help you and your media to work, right? So let's understand this. Let's understand why it's not working. And then I've 10 out of 10 times always been able to find the answers to those questions. But it just requires a little bit of a diagnostician type of approach to say, let's work on this. Let's understand what's not
Yeah.
working and figure it out. Yep.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. So in terms of tracking results, I mean, obviously at iHeart, I'm sure you guys have a suite of tools that you can work with. If someone is just out in the podcast space and they're like, I've never done podcast advertising before, it could be an agency that's never placed ads for their clients, or it could be a brand. What kind of methods do you think that they should use to track results?
So the first and the most popular one, podcasting started as a DR medium. Like the medium came to being because of direct response advertisers. So if it didn't work, there would
They
be no
wouldn't be
business. Like I find it
advertising.
so funny
I
to have
know.
to explain. Like, why do you think those businesses who had no big spending budgets only started with podcasting, went from business zero to mid-size, and then here we are saying, oh, it's not measurable. I don't know if it works. So that's the biggest proof I can give you because those guys, every dollar's got to count for them. And if it's not, they're not putting their money in there, right? So my point is, I think the best way to start is pixel-based tracking, right? To
Yeah.
get a sense of like, are you driving that traffic? The other way to think about it is I think we also have a little bit of a decision paralysis or choice paralysis when it comes to metrics. We are very obsessed. We don't understand the difference between a signal, a symptom, and an outcome. We also think
Mm,
that this is an exposure and this is an outcome. That's not how human behavior works. So I'm a clinical psychologist by education, and I'm an accidental analytics professional. So I bring a lot of human psyche and behavior to the table when I'm thinking through some of these things, because you have to understand ultimately what you're doing is you're persuading somebody to take an action. And
right.
that requires understanding the audience, requiring the understanding the person. Every time people like, oh, my search did X for my ROI. And I'm like, can I ask you a question? When was the last time you went on a search bar and typed something because Google search showed you that term? Zero, ever, right? It's because somebody told you about it. It's because you heard it somewhere, you read it somewhere, and then when you're thinking about it, you typed it in the Google bar. But what do you think is happening in the attribution models right now? Google's getting 100% attribution for you typing that word in the Google bar, yet it's just a destination for you to go to search for it. But search is definitely driven by something else before you get into the act of searching. And some of these nuances are, I think, lost. And I think where we could all benefit is understanding the how different media comes together instead
Hmm.
of like thinking platform first.
Hmm.
This black box environment where we've productized everything, saying search is Google mandated, social is Meta and TikTok mandated. I think understanding how the different media works together and what are the amplification value that other media brings to the table. I always talk about podcasting in particular, or audio in general, where I'll say, when you do audio before running a social campaign, your social campaign performs about 80% better. That's
Hmm.
because you've cognitively primed your
Yep.
audiences. Because an average scroll time on Instagram is 3 seconds. What are you
Right.
registering in 3 seconds? But if you've heard about the brand before, and then when you see that, it makes you want to click more. We have so much data that shows that being exposed to audio first increases 50 to 60% chances of you being clicked on. So, from an agency standpoint, from a brand standpoint, trying to experiment, I think the lowest hanging fruit is if you're doing social and if you're doing search,
Mhm.
like audio is the first place to start because both of those media are definitely helped by audio for those mediums to perform.
Yeah, I love that. And I get so frustrated when I feel like we look at podcasts in this silo and we're like, how does podcast perform all by itself? And just to your point, exactly, we know that when we run these awareness campaigns through audio, that your other platforms are going to perform so
Together.
much better. Like, of course they would. The other thing that I think gets really overlooked, and obviously the bigger the brand, the less consideration, is that if I have never heard of your product before, if I've never heard of your brand before, I can't just hear one or two ads and then say, oh, I'm going to run out and grab this product. I'm going to go buy it. And I
Oh
love
my
what,
God. I'm actually going to give you an example from my life now that you
yes,
say that.
please
For
do.
Black Friday, and to your point, actually, it was a really good ad, right? I didn't know I need this product and I almost purchased it. But because there was no awareness of the brand, the purchase didn't happen. So now listen to my example that I'm going to give you. For Black Friday, I'm scrolling through my Instagram, just personally doing my own stuff, right? And an LED mask pops up. And so I go, hey, I think this is awesome. So I text a few of my girlfriends saying, hey, do you think I should get this? And so one of my girlfriends is a cosmetologist and she's like, it's all the rage, but sure, give it a shot and see if it does anything for you, right? And so I got kind of like, yeah, do it, check mark. I'm sitting on the couch, I'm about to order, and my husband's sitting next to me, and I'm like, hey, would you want one? Because I'm going to get this for myself. And I'm so upset I asked him because he goes, what the hell is this brand? I'm like, have you heard of it before? Don't screw up your face like that. It's like, I've never heard of that brand. I would not do that. Right. So here I am as a wife upset, but as a marketer, so intrigued by that conversation because I'm like, right platform. I'm a 40-year-old woman on Instagram. You targeted me pretty darn well, right?
Yeah.
You gave me a product that I didn't know I needed and I was almost going to buy it. So the right product and brand fit, you got me with the right offer, whatever, right? I was about to buy it. I asked a few of the friends who in my target knew about it and said, sure, do it. But what happened? Someone who was not your core target audience had no brand awareness of that product, but is the influencer of my life, not a social influencer. My husband is the influencer in my life who said, I don't know that brand, girl, don't buy it. And so, to your point, if there is no awareness of your brand outside of your target audience, sometimes your purchases will cap out because guess what? I care for what my husband thinks. I care for what my kid thinks. And I care for what my kid's nanny thinks sometimes. And those decisions are not mine alone. And
Right.
so it's a very, very important point you make that creating bottom and mid funnel consideration and awareness, even outside of your current target audience, is extremely important. And in this micro extra targeting world, we have somehow forgotten to do that.
We have absolutely. And to me, it's such a huge oversight because I do think that we are doing, like you said, such micro targeting that we're thinking, oh, this specific person is going to purchase my product. But I mean, the point you made is just spot on. You have to have some general awareness of something before you're just going to run out and purchase it. And I love that you kind of layered on this piece that like maybe we think like, oh, it's $100 LED mask, like not a big deal. Like I'm going to purchase it. It's going to make sure that I don't have crow's feet in 10 years or whatever, right? Well, if that $100 purchase is a huge purchase for your potential target audience, right? Yes, of course, everyone would say we want to target these people making, 200,000 plus a year. But when in reality, how many of those people are out there to purchase your product? Like all of those things go into creating results. And I mean, I think that that obviously is one of the most complicated parts of marketing, right? Is that nothing is done in a silo. Everything feeds into one another. And the way that I feel about audio is that it is such an awareness vehicle. Now, as you said, obviously all of the DR shops and DR brands have made a huge living off of podcasts. So we know we can get direct response. But audio is one of those things where it's like, man, ZipRecruiter, ZipRecruiter, ZipRecruiter. You just hear it over and over and over again, and it gets
And if I
so
may,
embedded.
yeah, and if I may add to it, don't forget the mid funnel.
Mhm.
Because podcasting and audio is such a conversation medium, I know someone I've been listening for at weeks and days at length. When he or she says something, it immediately moves from awareness to consideration for me because there is this implicit trust with this person, right? So,
Right,
like, I think a lot of brands also struggle with this hourglass situation where they have an upper funnel strategy and then they have a bottom funnel strategy, and they're not thinking at all between the mid funnel. And
right.
I think audio can also be such a strong mid-funnel complement to that because through being part of the conversation, you're a very strong consideration contender.
Hmm.
Because you could have awareness and then you could have performance, but if you're not actively figuring out a way to strategize your mid-funnel, you won't see the immediate, not short-term, but slightly longer-term, short-term impacts.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I love just this idea that podcasts should be part of your overall brand strategy and your media mix. So, I guess I'm curious if you were to talk to a brand who had never advertised in podcasts in particular, maybe audio in general, what would you advise them in terms of how to get started?
So a couple of things, right? So one, I always say that the type of people podcasting is attracting is very different than a lot of other media. So for example, some of my clients who are heavily invested in TV, like we have some of the lightest TV viewers on our platform. So for you to be able to find net new
Mhm.
incremental audiences, you want to make sure that you're reaching out to mediums that is bringing different audiences that are not overlapping with your current media platforms, right? Social, I think, is great because social is a discovery medium in certain ways for you to discover your podcast. Like if you ask people, wait, how did you start listening to this podcast? It's, oh, I saw this one post about it, or I saw this one talk about it. And so social is almost a discovery medium. So if you're in social, it just makes perfect sense because from social, where are people going to have more long form consumption? It's podcasting.
Mhm.
So that you can tease on social, but then you can have a lot more longer attention spans because podcasting is an unmatched medium when it comes to attention, right? 90% completion rates, 95% completion rates. People listen through all the ads. People don't skip ads. The attention levels are the highest. People binge listen. Like once you
Right.
start on the season, when the season's on, people listen to hours and hours of it. So one, I like the fact that it brings you net new incremental audience with a level of attention and detail which no other media has. Because
No.
let me give you an example. We are, as a human, now officially under the goldfish attention span. Like goldfish attention span is 7 seconds. We are shorter than that. So we have no attention span. And yet, podcasting continues to command 3, 4, 5 hours worth of long podcast. People will listen to it. Where else can you say you can have someone's captive attention for 2 hours? There's no other
Hmm.
media. Like,
Nope.
when was the last time you watched TV without phone in your hand? I don't.
Right.
A laptop
No.
and a phone in my hand. So I'm not only double screening, I'm triple screening, if at all,
Right.
right? But think about any audio consumption that you've done, whether that be radio, whether that be streaming, or whether that be podcasting. I promise you, either you were driving, you were running, you were doing some chores around the house, or so on and so forth. You did not split your attention with any other medium.
Mm-mm.
So I think what I love about that is that you have to recognize that you are getting a very different type of attention impression for the quality of that impression is much, 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 much more valuable than quality of your other digital media impressions that you'll get.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that, as you mentioned, people are doing other things, but they're all autopilot things, right? They're all your subconscious is taken over, and you're driving down the same road that you've driven a million times, or you're folding laundry, and you don't need to think about what you're doing. So all of your attention is put on podcasting. One
Exactly
of the
right.
things that we've been talking about so much lately in the podcast space is video, video, video. And while I understand that YouTube is a great discovery vehicle for podcasts, and I understand that people are watching and listening through YouTube, I feel like it is so, so important that we cannot lose the value of the audio consumer because, to your point, it literally is the only medium out there where people are as engaged and are listening and consuming the amount of content that is not that fast paced. It is, I'm going to sit here and listen to this 2 hour interview. And you know what? If I'm going to listen to this guy talk for 2 hours, I'm going to listen to the ad read too, right? Because I'm interested in what he has to say. Like, it's so interesting to me. So I really think that it's so important that we don't lose sight of the value of audio and podcast in particular. What are your thoughts, I guess, about this video conversation that everyone seems to be having?
So a couple of different thoughts and maybe slightly unpopular, right? One is like you mentioned, right? I think the beauty of podcasting is in audio because it demands the type of attention like you can't find anywhere else.
Hmm.
But you have to remember a couple of different things. One, sure, video podcasting is starting to become a thing, but the exclusivity is very small. What I mean by that is
Hmm.
look at the histogram and understand what percent of people are consuming audio versus video, but you have to pay attention to what percent of people are only consuming audio versus only consuming video. That's when you're going to start to see the differences come to light because it's a very minority who will say, I only listen to video podcasts, right? And so, first, you as a marketer, you're trying to get scale. So, you don't want to go after 2% and 3% of the population or 2% niches there, right? So, you're trying to get scale. So, you want to be
Hmm.
on board. Video is a very small component. Now, if you have ready creative on your social and stuff and you want to put through that on video podcasting, sure. Because at iHeart, our belief has always been we're a very distributed strategy type of player. So, what I mean by that is, even when it was not popular and a lot of podcasting companies were taking their content behind paywall. This is my title and you can only listen on my platform. Even then, we were like, our content is freely available everywhere. If my listener wants to listen to me on Apple, wants to listen to me on Spotify, wants to listen to me on YouTube, we make our content freely available, right? So they can listen to
Yeah.
everyone. Same like, forget podcasting, even with radio. Alexa, we were the first one to have our radio stations on Amazon Alexa. Why? Because instead of alarm clocks, people started to listen to the radio on the Alexa. I was like, sure, you want to listen. As a audio player or the largest audio players in the country, we want to be wherever people want to consume us.
Yep.
But to the point, what you don't want to forget is the quality of attention is different in video and audio. What makes this medium appealing is the audio nature of it because our eyes are so maxed. We're on screens constantly. We're working from home. There's this detox. People love the intimacy of audio, the voice element of audio, where you don't have to look at something. And like to your point, when you're folding laundry or you're doing some chores around the house, you can still consume it and have a full attention.
Hmm.
So I don't know why would someone want to barter that high quality media for something that's so skippable and distracted and so multi-screened and so on and so forth. So, we have a visual bias and we like to see. So we think this is the next frontier of podcasting. I don't think so, just like I didn't think about paywalled podcast subscriptions 5 years ago when that was a thing.
Yeah.
And so I'm a firm believer that audio is the beauty of this medium and performance will speak for itself.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. Well, and, I just got back from podcast movement in Chicago, and there was so much talk about how you have to be flexible and change. And we could sit here for hours and talk about all of the different platforms that, saw a competitor coming and then said, no, that's not something for us to worry about. Let's just keep on the same path and then got obliterated. And I think that there is a bit of talk that, like, hey, if as an industry, we're not willing to be flexible and change to video, then we're going to get left behind. And this is what people want. But I just so firmly believe in the power of audio. And I don't think that it is the same as video. It really isn't. Now, if you're using YouTube to listen to a podcast, then that is very, very different, right? You are still listening, but there is power in audio, there's power in engagement. And I really think that it's so important for us as an industry to advocate for that because it's such a differentiator. And I hate this idea that we are trying to say, oh, yeah, well, there's so many billions of people on YouTube and we want to capture that and we want to be out there and get all that. Like, yes, of course, like you said, let's be where the consumer is. Of course, that's where we want to be. We just have to make sure that we're not losing the power of audio because it really just is so, so valuable. And I would just hate it as an industry if we became something that we didn't need to be and we lost really the value of what we have.
For no real reason at that, right? Like we just
Right.
some trend. And I think the other part is, Heather, I would think that it would make sense maybe in certain instances, right? Like think about like celebrity podcast or something of that sort. Sure. Like
Sure.
there are corner cases and there are instances where it makes sense. I just don't think it's a blanket thing. Also, we like to paint things in black and white. Is it video? Is it audio? It's not that, right? Like we as marketers want buckets and want to size them. Like it's not that because to me, it just goes back to I do something called this Tuesday takeaways. I don't know if you follow me on LinkedIn, but every Tuesday I will kind of post like my audio nugget of the week. And one of the weeks I talked about the storytelling medium that audio is and how it's such a beautiful way. But what reminded me of is all the stories my grandma told me. Like they were
Mm,
always audio stories. They're stuck with me. I still have a connect to those. That's an emotional connect. Find me another medium that can stir you up like that. And to your
right.
point, that's what we have at our hands. Why would we screw that up?
Yeah, yeah, no, absolutely. So I'm curious, it doesn't feel like there's been any really like big kind of movement or change within the podcast space. Obviously, COVID was kind of a big opportunity for us and everything really rose during that time. But it seems that kind of since 2023, things have calmed down a bit. There's really not been anything too crazy that has happened in the last year and a half or 2 years. What technology innovation do you see on the horizon that's maybe going to spark some next level energy into the medium?
There are a couple of things. I mean, one, I do think that some experimentation with like 3D audio or immersive audio or something along those lines in podcasting could be very interesting. Like, for example, if you're doing like Halloween stories or something like baked in voices that are
Mm,
fireplace or spooky or like just kind of bringing it more to life in some way, shape, or form without compromising the intimacy of that medium. And I
hmm
think with AI in general, that could be something that can just really very quickly be mass, right? The other thing I do think is going to be we're going to see a huge cross-pollination because what AI is going to enable is translation. And I think we are
Yeah.
sitting in a moment of us being introduced to a lot of other type of content and other type of content being introduced to all the American Indian English content that's been sitting here. I think there's a huge expansion waiting to happen globally and other places where podcasting is still a pretty niche medium.
hmm
So I think we are going to see America's been ahead of the curve in terms of the consumption. You're going to see very fast follow, particularly with the help of AI in terms of languages. And so I do think that that's the next place to watch out outside of some more immersion in the medium.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's terrific. So I guess just as we wrap it up here, I guess just parting words of advice that you would have for advertisers in the space.
Yeah, sure. Why not? So I think a couple of things, right, from a podcasting standpoint. One, creative is the king. So make sure
Mm,
like your creative is really emotionally embedded. You kind of have a real creative hook into it. And the amount of time and effort you give to tracking and targeting that's also been given to creative because that's going to set you apart. That's going to build your brand and that's going to build your identity. So, one is just make sure you're giving enough creative resourcing to the concept, right? Because it's a slightly tricky thing versus just coming up with a visual or a picture, but done right can be 10 times more powerful than a picture. And so that's
mhm,
one. The second part of it is the authenticity and the mix of like assets available to you. Like be really unscripted in the right ways, real conversations, human voice, use it to your advantage. Because to your point earlier, like this medium brings very distinct features.
mhm.
Use them and leverage them instead of just trying to replicate what you're doing in other places. Like it's a voice that resonates with you. Is it a dialect that resonates? Is it a woman versus a man? Is it funny tone versus humorous versus sarcasm? Find those things that work for you because I do think that that can really, again, set you apart in terms of that, right? The third thing I'm actually going to say, very, very important to brands listening. Almost more than half of searches are going to become voice search. And
Mm,
what we as brands have to recognize is that now it's not an option to figure out what your audio sonic branding is. You have to find your voice. You have to say, in a world where screen is not the first thing, think about all these smart glasses. Think about, like, I have the Meta glasses. That's the only way I consume music now. I don't put headphones on into my ears anymore. And at some point, they're going to start having some screens and things in there, right? But my point is, in a world where I'm just going to search for things while walking to home on an audio device, is your brand there? And
right.
what is your brand's identity? Again, going back to my Tuesday takeaway, my last Tuesday takeaway was 50% of the searches are going to be audio by X number of years. What's your
hmm
plan as a brand to make sure that you're recognized not just by eyes, but also ears.
Mm-hmm.
That's the third thing I would throw there in the mix, that it's not a nice to have anymore, given where we are going with voice.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, going back to that stat that you said earlier, right? If we're spending 30% of our consumption time on audio, you have to have that. It's not an option. And I totally agree. I think that it's really a very important piece of marketing and it cannot go neglected.
Yeah.
So, well, Hital, thank you so
Especially,
much for, I'm sorry, go ahead.
sorry, I was going to say, especially as you start to see saturation when you just use one or two mediums, right? Like if you're only
Mm,
social and search, if you're only like one or two places, you're going to hit a point of like a ceiling.
absolutely. Yep.
And so the only way to find the next growth vector is through audio.
Uh-huh. Yeah, no, absolutely. I totally agree. Well, Hital, thank you so much for being on the show today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. This was fantastic.
Thank you for listening. I hope that you have enjoyed this episode as much as I have. If you're interested in following Hital on LinkedIn, it sounds like her Tuesday takeaways really are a great place to get great information. So make sure you head on over to LinkedIn and connect with her. Thanks for listening, and we will catch you again next time. Thank you for listening to the Podcast Advertising Playbook, your source to a better understanding of the podcast advertising industry.